As we're sort of moving past this presidential debate that happened this week, there's a lot to unpack. And, look, the pundits are going to go on and on about who won, who lost. Obviously, Kamala Harris, the vice president, had a very strong showing. I think a lot of people didn't think she would. She did show up. And, look, former President Donald Trump, there were a number of missed opportunities, I think, for him, but I'm not really here to talk about that. What I want to talk about is the fact that abortion has really become a centerpiece of this campaign for Harris. This is something that we have seen again and again and again. And I'm going to tell you, and I've said this on a number of podcasts this week, but I want to reiterate it here because I found it incredibly from a Christian perspective, right? I'm not talking from a journalistic perspective. I found it disturbing to see her, obviously a little nervous at the beginning of the debate, which I think is natural, but to see her actually come alive while she was talking about abortion on that stage. You really saw a passion for this issue for her, and it was evident in how she addressed it and how she spoke. And look, I can't overemphasize the differences between Trump and Harris. It is evident. And again, I'm not here to defend one or the other, but I do think when it comes to this issue of abortion, we have to have a real conversation here. And I feel like such a broken record because I've talked about this over the years. I've done, I don't even know, maybe hundreds of stories on this issue of abortion since I've worked in media. And what frustrates me so much is the refusal to tell the truth about the issue, the concealing of data, of information, the emotional manipulation that unfolds. And we saw that really on full display as that tense exchange was kicking off. And by the way, I wrote about this in my column this week at the Washington Times. You can find the article there and you'll see some overlap in what I'm talking about here. But that was my column for the week because I feel very passionately about this. Trump said that the Democrats essentially push abortion in the ninth month, right? That was what started the tense exchange that happened. And by the way, it was an exchange that happened not just with Trump and Harris, but the moderators themselves getting involved. And I'll talk about that in a moment, which is not the job of moderators. But look, former President Trump's claim that he highlighted there about the ninth month, that got pushback, obviously, from a number of people from Harris. And there's this constant denial that abortions can happen up until the moment of birth. The reality is, there are numerous places in this country, including Tim Walz's state, where there are no restrictions on abortion, where there are no gestational restrictions. That means that there is no reason if a doctor is willing to do it, and you can say all day that doctors don't do that, they won't do it. Well, I covered the Gosnell case, and that was one example of somebody who was willing to do things. And if you don't know about him, go ahead and Google Kermit Gosnell, and you'll see some of the most disturbing things that you could imagine. But my point is, it doesn't really matter what a candidate like Harris is saying or what a moderator is saying. Abortions can happen unfettered in this country in numerous places, again, including Minnesota. Now, let's talk about what Trump was addressing. He was addressing this constant reluctance by Harris in particular and other politicians. She's not the only one, particularly people on the progressive side who refuse to go on the record in support of any restriction whatsoever on late term abortion. They will not talk about it, they will not enact it. The American people, okay, in polling, have said, and this is the majority of pro-choicers too, that they would cap abortion at 3 months. So many people, the majority of Americans have said, look, we think with obviously exemptions, abortion should really stop after 3 months. Why is it that politicians like Harris are refusing to discuss the issue of even capping it at 6 months, at 7 months? Why are we allowing this to happen where there are places in this country with no restrictions? And we saw in this debate when moderator Lindsay Davis asked Harris, would you support any restrictions on a woman's right to an abortion? Rather than answer that question directly, rather than be honest about it, Harris responded, I absolutely support reinstating the protections of Roe v. Wade. But anybody who knows Roe v. Wade knows, and by the way, I love when people talk about this being settled law. It is no longer settled law because it's not the law anymore. The Dobbs decision overturned it. And that's why a lot of these battles are kicking up. A lot of this dishonesty is kicking up because of the tension around that. But Roe v. Wade didn't offer protections for the unborn. The point of Roe v. Wade was to ensure that states would allow abortions up until essentially the 6 month period when a baby was viable. So her response that she wants to return to Roe v. Wade, great. We understand she wants to return to Roe v. Wade. She wants to do it legislatively. She wants to sign, a bill into law that does that. But the reality here and the point here, and this is what we have to understand, is that when she was asked directly, would she support any caps on abortion? She didn't really answer the question. She wants to go back to Roe v. Wade. Well, if you can't do that, which it seems unlikely that you're going to get legislation to pass that makes Roe v. Wade the law of the land federally, will you, as president, enact any sort of, even morally, do you have it in you to say that morally you think it is wrong to terminate a pregnancy later on at 7 months, at 6 months, at 4 months even? Why are we not being honest about that and having that conversation? And so I can spend a lot of time on that. I'm not going to do that because I want to mention a few other things. Harris went on to say, nowhere in America, this is a quote, is a woman carrying a pregnancy to term and asking for an abortion. That is not happening. It's insulting to the women of America. Again, we can say it's not happening, but we don't have the data to prove it. You may feel that. I mean, look, it's insane. It's insane for a person to go and say at 7 months, I want to have an abortion, right? Without any underlying, we can have the moral debate around that. But the point is, are women going at 7 months and saying, I want to have an abortion? I knew somebody personally who was pretty far into a pregnancy past the 6 month mark who was going to have an abortion. And there was no other reason other than she decided she no longer wanted to have that baby. So there are people who fall into this category. It exists. I'm sure it is happening, but she says it's not happening. So we're supposed to take that at face value. And I want you to understand this is not a partisan conversation. This is a human conversation. When you are talking about the fact that there are thousands of late term abortions that unfold in this country every single year. Why are there no protections? Why are there no caps in some places in this country? Harris and others, they refuse to go on the record and address this or talk about it. And even though the moderators loved jumping in to fact check Trump, they didn't really do the same when it came to Harris. When she said there was nowhere in America that this was happening, we have to be honest and say the data isn't really complete on this. In fact, we have very little data on late term abortion in this country. It is sparse, it is incomplete, and we do not have a picture of what this looks like. One of the other things we need to talk about when this conversation about abortion comes up, quite often this statistic, people love it, particularly on the progressive side. Only 1% of abortions, or fewer than 1%, it's like 0.9% in some of the data that we have, of abortions unfold after the 21-week period. And so, because 99% of them don't, according to the data, that 1%, I guess it doesn't really matter. And of course, 1% sounds pretty small, but when you're talking, and this is a conservative number, about a country, America, where 625, 978 abortions, almost 626,000 abortions unfolded in 2021 alone, that percentage, that 1%, accounts for 6,250 abortions. So over 6,000 babies being aborted late term after 21 weeks in a pregnancy. So you can throw around that 1% all day long, but it translates into over 6,000 babies who are terminated. And we don't really have data or understanding on why. Of course, there are extenuating circumstances. There are situations where unborn babies are very, very sick, where a mother finds herself ill. Although when that happens in a situation where a mother has a full-term baby, the fact that they're walking around saying that an abortion needs to happen when that baby could be birthed out or a C-section could be given and that child could survive is actually insane that they're advocating for abortion once a baby is full term. But that is another conversation. The point is that statistic, that 1%, is often used and I think misused. And the real number, the 6,250, that is not talked about. Now, when we come back to the debate here with Trump and Harris going back and forth, I want to mention a quote that Trump gave because this was another point of contention. And this is where the moderators decided they were going to get involved once again. Trump said, you can look at the previous governor of West Virginia. He said, the baby will be born and we will decide what to do with the baby. In other words, we'll execute the baby. Now, those are Trump's words. There is some context here, okay? And this is interesting because not long after Trump said this, Lindsay Davis, the moderator, she inserted herself in the conversation. She fact checked Trump and she said, "quote There is no state in the country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born." Now, she's technically true. We're playing semantics here a little bit. Though there have been a number of critics who have said, why is the moderator getting involved? That is Harris's job, not the moderator's job to jump in and say, hey, there's no law that allows this to happen. But that's not necessarily true in terms of babies that might survive an abortion. And that might sound strange to those of you who don't know what that means. So we'll talk about that here in just a second. But I want to just mention a couple of things. Trump said West Virginia. I believe he meant Virginia. He was talking about former Virginia Governor Ralph Northam, who came under fire back in 2019 for comments that he made about late term abortion. So what Trump was paraphrasing were the former Virginia governor's comments. Now, at the time, Northam, who was a doctor, he served 4 years as governor of Virginia. Back in 2019, he was addressing a controversial bill that ended up failing, but this particular bill would have reduced the number of doctors who were needed to sign off on late term abortions, right? So in Virginia, you needed 3 doctors, you still do, to sign off essentially on a late term abortion in order for it to happen. This bill would have reduced it, I believe, to 1 doctor. Now, they also need to prove that the woman's health is substantially impaired in some way. And so the former governor was reacting to that proposal because it was a controversial proposal. And he was raising some eyebrows because he said, while there may be babies with severe deformities or unborn children who are non viable, in a situation like that, and I'm going to read the quote, he said, the infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desire. And then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and the mother. So that's the comment. That's the context of what Trump was talking about there. He wasn't very specific, but that's what he is referring to. And it was the comment about resuscitation, obviously, that shocked critics because keep in mind, the governor there, Northam, the former governor, he made these statements again while being pressed over remarks from the bill's sponsor, this controversial bill, that indicated that the proposal would have actually allowed abortions even as a woman showed physical signs that she was about to give birth. So the sponsor of this bill, if you'll remember stretching back to 2019, she was asked about, hey, if a woman is dilating, if a woman is showing physical signs that she's about to give birth, would these abortions under this bill still be possible? And she had answered, yes, they would be. That obviously sparked controversy. The governor was then responding to that and making this resuscitation claim that most people are saying, wait, a baby that is accidentally born in a sort of situation like that, you should be providing health care to that child to save them. You shouldn't be leaving them there to die. And so that's a backdrop on what Trump was talking about. He, of course, didn't give details, didn't explain the context, and that I think led to confusion about precisely what he was speaking on. But I got to mention one other thing because this also drives me crazy on this topic. When we are talking about the abortion issue and we're having this debate, people like Harris and Northam and others, they will persistently claim that late term abortions are always tied to deformities or severe circumstances. And that's sort of the excuse for why late term abortions always happen. You heard me quoting Harris before during the debate, basically saying this is the way it is. No woman goes and asks for an abortion later on in a pregnancy. But let's talk about that Virginia law, the one that allows after second trimester abortions if 3 doctors sign off. And those doctors have to sign off and they have to say that the pregnancy is likely to result in the death of the woman. And here it is, or substantially and irremediately impair the mental and physical health of the woman. So, not just the physical health, it would impair the mental health of the woman. This mental health aspect in the law leaves the door wide open, it would seem, for other excuses not mentioned by these politicians, right? Not mentioned by Harris and others who focus on these heartbreaking situations that families face. There's a mental health exemption allowing late term abortion if, in some way, it doesn't say the woman would die, it says there would be some impairment to the mental or physical health of the woman. So this is why people have issues with this because the gaping holes in the law, the lack of protections are troubling to people, as they should be when you are talking about human beings late on in a pregnancy and just being able to essentially come up with some sort of excuse that falls under the law. So the laws are way more progressive, way more liberal than we are often told by the politicians. Now, I want to circle back to Mr. Trump's comments about execution after birth, because another piece of context here, Trump was taking aim essentially at Tim Walz, Kamala Harris's running mate, and he said her vice presidential pick says abortion in the ninth month is absolutely fine. He also says execution after birth. It's execution, no longer abortion, because the baby is born is okay. And that's not okay with me. Now, again, while Mr. Trump did not give further context here, he's referring likely, very likely here, to Mr. Wall's controversial amendment in a repeal of laws as governor that he was responsible for. And there were laws there requiring life saving treatment to be given to infants who were born alive during botched abortions. Okay. So these are babies who there's an intended abortion and they somehow survive it. This is something that does happen. And when it does happen, giving those children life saving measures is important. Now, I want to read a little bit from a report in the Dispatch that explains what this looks like. So, this report reads: the bill left intact the first subdivision, which read all reasonable measures consistent with good medical practice, including the compilation of appropriate medical records, shall be taken to preserve the life and health of the child, but changed its language requiring medical personnel to preserve the life and health of the baby born, sorry, the born alive infant, to instead require medical personnel to quote care for the infant who is born alive. Now, critics found this language to be deeply troubling. And in case anyone is doubting, let's just address this: the fact that there are babies who are accidentally born alive in Minnesota. Let's just talk about Minnesota, where Tim Walz is governor. This happened at least 16 times. There were at least 16 babies born alive during a procedure between 2015 and 2018. It happened 3 times in 2019, 5 times in 2021. This is something that happens. And so apparently, Walz's bill that he signed also reportedly repealed certain aspects regarding the reporting that surrounds these, children who are born alive. So there's a lot unfolding here, but we also have to take into account, again, Harris's running mate. He signed a bill embedding abortion rights into Minnesota law, and this was a measure that includes no limits to abortion, meaning that it is legally available, again, throughout the entirety of a pregnancy. Why does it need to be legally available throughout the entirety of a pregnancy if Harris says that women are not just going and asking for those abortions? There's no reason you can't cap abortion at some point, even after 6 months, let's say, and say, hey, there has to be, like Virginia's law, right? Some extenuating circumstance. Why is it that we can't get these politicians to say that they would even favor that? And so the reality is, Trump is guilty of missing key details, and some people might disagree with his conclusions, the way he's wording things, but that gives you some context on what was happening there in that debate. And that is important context to understanding his remarks. It's actually disappointing that the moderators who felt they needed to constantly, it felt like, correct Trump, which fine, if that's the role you feel like you need to have. I don't think that's the role of a debate moderator. That's the role of his opponent, Kamala Harris. But if you feel you need to do that, then you need to do it equally. When Kamala Harris is saying something about abortion that is not accurate, you need to fact check it. And they did not do that, which really, truly is disappointing at best. That is my rant. I know it's long winded, but there's a lot there to unpack. And I think it's helpful to get a chance to understand what exactly it was going on, what exactly Trump was speaking about during that debate.